Blending is getting a lot of attention lately, and I keep hearing really basic, confidently spoken statements about blending, that this is how it works, and this is the rule, and they're wrong. Or I should say, partially correct. But man, do they say it with confidence. So I thought I would talk about it a little bit here. I'm Dana Whittington, Chancellor of the Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. That was a nice one. Thank you, Bardstown, for the synthetic cork. Thank you. It's the gift that continues to keep your whiskey safe. There's a lot of information in the world about production. Like if you're trying to learn how to make whiskey or you're learning about how whiskey is made, there is countless information about fermentations and yeast and pot still, column still, distillation, blah. There is very little in the way of information about blending as an art form or even as a practice. It's just stated in a book. Yeah, people blend, they mix some barrels together to create their profile. It's like really overview, but there's no behind the scenes of like, this is what it looks like to blend and this is how you do it. And so what happens is you get a handful of people who do talk about it in Scotland or Ireland or sometimes in the US, and they will make global statements like, this is how you blend, this is how blenders blend, this is how a master blender blends whiskey. And they'll make a huge global statement, and because there's not a lot on the internet, then a bunch of people who've done Googling instead of studying walk into tastings and they're like, well, I heard that all master blenders do this. And that's not true. For example, all master blenders blend at 20% alcohol. They proof all their samples down to 20%, and then they don't drink, they only nose. Now, is it true that a lot of master blenders in Scotland and Ireland proof down their samples to 20 and don't sip, they only smell? Yes, that is true. But when you look at who's doing it, it is almost entirely brands owned by large corporations who are working with massive amounts of barrels. And they actually have rules about drinking on the job, even though they're blenders. So they can't even, so they will proof everything down to 20 because that is actually, they have done studies that 20% alcohol does give you a really great balance of all of the smells of the whiskey, but it lowers the ethanol to the point where you have less chance of nose fatigue due to ethanol. And so it is a very common blending in the large scale, big production, massive sample size blending. They may not ever taste it. If you're blending Bullet, you may never taste your blend. You may go entirely off a nose and then sign off on it and it goes into a bottle. Why? Because you're working with tens of thousands of barrels at a time. Your variances are all going to be washed out by sheer volume of the dump in the blend, right? Now, craft guys, I've seen every variation under the sun. I've seen them do assessment at cask strength. I've seen them blend at cask strength and then proof down after. I've seen them, if they know that they're going to sell a bottle at Bottled and Bond, then they'll proof all the samples down to 50 and then they'll blend at 50 because that's where they can. And they will almost always in the last stages of the blend taste it to try to get an understanding of the consumer experience. I don't know of a single craft distillery that is not tasting and is doing everything at 20% alcohol. I don't know, well, I'm sure there's somebody, but I don't know any of them. So why the variances? And why is it okay? Why are the different things? Let's talk about Bardstown first. This was a gift from our friend Ron Miles, who mailed this. This is the Bardstown Origin Series. This is the first of their, like, truly they made it, all of themselves. It's 6 years old. It was distilled in 2016, so this is a 2022, 2023 release. I just now am getting a chance to actually try it. Gosh, the world is moving too fast. In-house bourbon. It was an estate distilled. It just means, hey, we made it instead of sourced it. Estate distilled. My God, are we coming up with more and more complex ways to just say, hey, I made this. Grain to glass, estate production processes. It's like, oh, sweet Jesus. Okay. Origin Series. Dan Calloway is product development at Bardstown. Really don't know him. Personally know of him. Have a Venn diagram overlap with a lot of friends. Highly respected, great human being by every account, and I trust his palate. Everything I've had from him, I've always enjoyed. That's interesting. So this is 68, the breakdown's right here. Oh no, where was it? There it is. 60% corn, 36 rye, 4% malted barley. This is a really high rye. It does not smell nearly as dry and spicy as I had anticipated it would. It is way rounder. The sweetness is more caramelized than it is dry. Not a lot of metallic kind of vanillin notes. There it is. Once it's been opened for a little bit, the evaporation in the glass is starting to finally give me those dry rye baked spices. But still, it's very sweet. Like cinnamon sugar, but on like a dry toast. Ooh, that's nice. There's an almost, back in the day, I used to describe this thing as like a wicker taste. This sort of like almost varnish, almost dried leather, almost wood oil, almost dry grass. And all that combination comes into, for me, a Pier 1 wicker basket. And there's a little bit of that in the palate, this sort of like dry, earth is the wrong word, dry grass wicker. But it's nice. Now it's cherry candy coming to the front, or a sweet candy, hard candy, almost like a Jolly Rancher direction of some kind of sweetness. Yeah, it's well made, which is no surprise. Bardstown makes really high quality product, and it's very tasty, and I would like to try it on the rocks. It's 96 proof, 43%. It punches above its weight. It feels a little more rich than that. It's not as thin as you would think from that, but all right. So as you blend, which this is a mix of different barrels together, right? Remember, sensory work, me giving tasting notes, a blender blending barrels together and doing QC on barrel products, it is pattern recognition, right? So you can blend however you want as long as your internal pattern recognition markers stay consistent, right? So if you're used to blending Maker's Mark with 20% samples, and then you're forced to blend it at cask strength samples, it's gonna be all wrong. It's gonna just completely screw with your head. You can't just make that transition instantly. But if you spent 5 years blending 20% samples and achieving this exact recreation, and you know exactly what Maker's Mark is supposed to smell like at 20%, then you can actively recreate that blend over and over and over, and it will be a flawless representation at whatever the bottling strength is. So it absolutely has to do with your own sensory internal markers and perception. I knew somebody who was embarrassed about the fact they smoked cigarettes and they were gonna go do some blending in Scotland. They were like, man, I know cigarettes folk with your palate, but I've smoked cigarettes. And then he went to Scotland, and half the people he met in the blending industry in Scotland were chain smoking cigarettes on their breaks. And he was like, what? And he was like, oh, patterns. And he said, I'd realized on that day, if I ever give up cigarettes, I'm gonna have to work my ass off to recreate new patterns for what our spirits taste like at that point. And he did. In craft, the rule is variability. That is the rule. Smaller barrel counts make it almost impossible to get an exact identical representation of a historical product. Now you can get into the family, but a craft whiskey industry is going to be all about embracing batch variation. And because they're working with smaller barrel counts and they're just trying to get the essence of the thing, they can afford to build their own patterns, pay attention to their barrels, and then blend something for the soul of the thing, but with a small inconsistency that is still within the right profile for that batch, and that's gonna be fine. The trick is, or I should say, the point is there's all kinds. There is no single way to blend. Anybody who walks in with a global statement of, this is how you blend and everyone else is doing it wrong, is full of shit. In case you were wondering. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here. For the most estate-produced, perfectly blended YouTube channels, it's this one. Like and subscribe.